I thank you very much for tuning in to the No Fruit Podcast. Now, what if I told you that every thriving relationship, no matter how different, relies on just two golden gifts? Today, we sit down with Bruce and Judy to uncover why stability and intimacy are the foundation for love that lasts. We'll talk to you right after this.
Let's talk about love and marriage, the way that God intended. Life experience, here we share it. The No Fruit Podcast. Tune in from any platform. No Fruit Podcast. Will help your spirit transform.
We thank you very much for tuning in. So we're going to have some fun on this episode. We have two powerhouses that we're going to talk about these topics today. And so let me ask you both, why is stability important? Especially in some cases, we didn't see it growing up. So how will we know how important that really is?
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you take this because Bruce is the couples therapist, and this is kind of his shtick. It's he's written all about it in his books, and it's part of his work. So go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah,
Take it away. I'm not a therapist, just FYI.
Well, Judy's a retired educator, and we do our podcast together because it's like, I'm the therapist and she's the real person. That's kind of how we do that. But that's a great question. With stability, why is stability important? And lots of folks I work with didn't experience a lot of it growing up. Stability is important. One way of saying it is because the absence of it, you're constantly in a state of anxiety, constantly on the verge of freaking out. And it doesn't work well to freak out. And I'll actually throw in the title of our podcast that we do together is called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And the 7 words are be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And the reason I mention that in the context of what you're asking about is if you're in a panic, which is what instability is all about. If you're in a panic, it's very difficult to be kind. And to have faith for it is so you can be not in a panic, actually. We can come around to that. But that's the issue, that stability is really important so you can, and when I say be kind, it's not just about be nice, we should all be nice. It's about be kin, recognize your kinship, recognize that commonality. When a couple feels that, that's when they're going to want to stay together. That's when they feel like, okay, well, we may have differences, but we're in this together. And when they don't, that's when the relationship is in trouble. So stability is super important for that.
But how do we put it out there if we haven't seen it? So some of our listeners didn't grow up with a 2-parent household, right? Or even from an educational standpoint, we might not have seen consistency in education in our school systems and, things like that. So how will we know what stability looks like if we don't have a true role model in that? So because I think that's a good question for each and every one of us.
Yeah, do you want to comment on that?
I think the first part of your equation is the be kind part. Now Bruce and I, it's a second marriage for both of us.
Okay.
So I can only address my marriage, but the first part, you have to remember, and this is what I found in my relationship with Bruce, is that each of us puts the other's needs, I don't want to say before our own, but we're always aware of the fact that anything we do or say affects the other person. And because we love each other, truly, deeply love each other, we don't want to say anything that's going to be offensive, that's going to be mean, that's going to be hurtful. So if you keep that in mind, it starts coming more naturally.
Now, I will note, your question is about, well, what about folks who never really saw that modeled? And you pointed out, like in your first marriage, you weren't experiencing that in the same way, and I, for different reasons, also in mine. But that phenomenon of if you haven't seen it before, how do you end up seeing it? I wish I had a really good answer for that, but what I will note is I have worked with lots of folks over the years who didn't have that growing up, and yet they somehow have a sense that they want it. I think it's sort of built into our evolution as humans, that we want to feel that sense of things being reasonably stable. And when we don't have it, we seek it. We try to find ways of seeking it out. Now, I will notice, I will note as a couples therapist, people come to me because they're seeking that. They already know to seek it. I guess people who don't know to seek it don't come to me. So I don't get to see folks. It's funny. Before I was a psychologist, I was a statistician back in the day, a long time ago, and I still sometimes think like a statistician. I don't get a random sample of people. I get the people who are seeking out help. Well, seeking out help itself is a sign that somebody's looking for that kind of stability. So I think that's. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? Among folks that or what you've seen in your own life, how do you seek that out if you don't know to seek it out?
So for myself, I was able to see it in some of the most inopportune situations, by chance, if you will, So whether I saw it in the market, genuine conversations, genuine support, you start to see, because I'm a big stickler about opening up her door and things like that. So these little gestures, I didn't always see it, in my own household because of, my mother and my father were separated, they were married but separated. But then I started looking at TV and looking at, growing up in the 80s, that's what some of our TV shows were like, and so for me, my examples were those that were outside, listen to I did have one teacher that was married that talked about it, but most of my other teachers were not. That's why I brought the whole education piece as well, because sometimes we don't even hear that in the classroom, and so those were my examples. What about you, Kyle?
I think I agree with you, Bruce, in reference to it's something that's within us. I think even as an infant and you see them start to walk, they want that stability. Like they could have stability just continuing to lie down on the bed, but they want that to get up and go, but they want to be stable and all those things. So I think it's just something within our nature where we want that stability and we strive for that and we look for that, even if it's not in our own relationship with our spouse or within any other type of relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever that may be. Well, you look for it in the workplace. You look for it within your siblings. You look for it, with your friendships. So I think you look for that stability and that kin, if you will, that connection in multiple places. So I think that's kind of where things kind of you still look for it and you still can find it in other ways, even if it isn't at home. You still look for it in other places, and sometimes that's enough for some people to have it in at work. You have your work besties.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I think you can look to your friendships and see which ones of your friends, which couples are working, which couples do you want to be around because you know that they're going to be nice and loving and kind to each other, and where are the ones who they're going to be picking on each other all night and fighting. It's like, and you say, am I like that? Do I want to be like that? So it takes a lot of personal soul searching as well to see, where am I complicit in behaviors that might be bringing out something that's not good in the other person. So what is it about me? I can't blame the failure of my first marriage only on my ex-husband, although most of it is as well. But But there were two of us in there, and so I didn't want to repeat those same mistakes. They say, "Oh, you people keep marrying the same people." No. I married somebody who was nothing like my first husband, and it's brought out, I would say, a better side of me. The side that I liked and wanted to get back to.
And you're also noting something else, which I think is important with respect to folks who've grown up where there wasn't a lot of stability. Right. We learn. And you were kind of talking about this too, Maurice, that we learn from things we didn't have also. We learn from what we're missing. And again, that thing in us that says, we really want that. It just works better. I mean, I use the word stability. I could easily use the word safety. That little toddler learning to walk, they're gonna experiment with all kinds of things and flop down. And, it's fun to watch toddlers learning to walk, but they do it better when they're in a basically safe environment to do it.
Right.
And if they are, then they're going to be able to explore and, and if they're not, they're going to know that they're missing. Well, mostly they're going to know they're going to missing, at least if they've had some examples. I've been inspired over the years. Some of the work I've worked with couples for a long time. I've also I did a lot of work with individuals recovering from trauma of various kinds. It was a lot of what I was trained in, and I did a lot of that work over the years. And I've always been inspired by folks who had these really painful childhoods with abuse and neglect and all kinds of horrible stuff. And yet they would talk about this one person. Sometimes it was the lady in the candy store who smiled at them once, I mean, they'll just find it. They'll find this one thing that said, oh, here's somebody who's giving me the idea that I'm worth smiling at, who's giving me a sense that I'm lovable. And they'll find it. And it's just so inspiring to me that people can find it in awful conditions sometimes. So, that's all about stability.
Yeah, so even talking about stability, I had to learn, in all honesty. Now, we've been married for going on 25 years. And so it probably took a good 24 and a half years to understand.
We're still works in progress here, right?
Right. How important stability was to our intimacy. And so that's why I'm touching stability so much, because I didn't always understood. I didn't always understand how connected they really were.
Yeah.
And what the intimacy really meant as well, definition wise. Because sometimes we think intimacy is always physical. No, I mean, I look at it right now as intimacy is just us sitting at the table drinking tea together.
Absolutely. Yes. And I talk about that, because that's the other side of it is intimacy. The two golden gifts, as they call them. Pretty hokey name, frankly, but but I liked it. It works. So the thing about intimacy is, indeed, it's not just about a physical relationship.
Right.
It's also about, and my sort of general definition, what I say intimacy is when you're present and honest with yourself and each other. And when I mean present and honest, you can be present physically, and when people are having a sexual relationship, if they're really both into it, right, that's a sense of intimacy. But also present and honest, emotionally, spiritually, however you want to say it, where you get to be who you are with all the mixed feelings. It's not like I only ever feel one thing at a time. We all have mixed feelings.
Right.
But to be in the presence of other people doing that at the same time is what I mean by intimacy. And my basic sense of why you need them both is you absolutely need stability in order to have any hope of intimacy. Right. You also need intimacy for stability to continue.
Yes.
And my point is that both stability and intimacy are needs. And what happens to a couple and one of the reasons intimacy often actually wears out over time, it doesn't have to, but often it does, because people so are focused on stability, they're afraid to rock the boat. They're afraid to, just a simple complaint about something, or to say, oh, I've been dreaming of something and I'm kind of afraid to tell you because I think you're going to think I'm weird. To not do that cuts off intimacy. And that itself can be destabilizing. And my favorite metaphor about this, I always you've heard this 17 million times. Yes. But it's my favorite metaphor is if you think about a plant, planted in soil, and a living organism, and it germinates and sprouts and starts to grow. And then somebody comes along and paves a sidewalk over it. Well, why would anybody pave a sidewalk over it? To make it more stable, right? So it's easier to walk on. Well, that's nice. The trouble is that plant is going to not just sit there. It's going to try and crack the sidewalk or die trying, because if you think about that plant, the roots provide stability, but intimacy is the energy for growth. And that's true in plants, and it's true in humans, it's true in couples, which are an organism more than just the two people in it. And living organisms want to grow. And if that gets cut off, it's going to try and metaphorically crack the sidewalk. And what does that look like in a couple? It looks like a couple fighting about anything and everything except the stuff they're too afraid to talk about. It looks like somebody all of a sudden up and leaving. It looks like somebody having an affair. It looks like somebody getting very depressed. All of those things are often indications that something's wrong in the intimacy department. And it's so interesting what you were saying, Maurice, about realizing, yeah, stability is really important for that. And here I turn to the women in the conversation because you and I aren't. So I don't want to mansplain to the women. But there is often characteristic, not everybody, there's a lot of overlap, but there are characteristic differences between men and women, especially around intimacy. And I don't just mean sex. I don't just mean physical intimacy, that have a lot to do, I think, I'm turning to the women here. It has a lot to do with that sense of feeling basically safe. Before you're going to feel safe to be intimate with a guy, you need to feel like the guy's safe with you. Is that
right?
Exactly.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, you want to know he's going to be there for you, and you want to know that if you say something to him, like you said earlier, whether it's a criticism or a suggestion, that he's not going to shoot you down and say, "Ooh, what kind of weirdo are you?" That way, you're less inclined to say something in the future. So let's say if it's even if it's something mundane, like I really would prefer that you don't leave your clothes on the floor. Or you could say it like, would you stop leaving your clothes on the floor? It's little differences like that. So if you're going to go with that, stop leaving your clothes on the floor, then you're not going to want to say something in the future. So, but if you say, I'd really appreciate if you would pick up your clothes because I trip on them, and that leaves a venue where you can talk about things in the future without feeling like you're being shot down, without feeling like you're stupid, without feeling like you're being critical of each other. So it's those little things when I said earlier on how you talk to each other, and that will open up a greater venue for intimacy, just so you're able to talk to each other without feeling attacked.
And I will note from a guy's perspective, again, not to stereotype us too much, but from a guy's perspective, guys are often feeling like, well, one of the ways of expressing intimacy is sex. And seems like when women feel, not to mansplain to the women, but when women feel safer and respected in the ways you were describing, and when you can say what you want to say and actually feel like you're being heard, it turns out women are much more interested in having sex with guys then, usually. And that makes guys feel good because we are, we're wired somewhat differently, and in ways that I think, they kind of make sense in terms of evolution. It's like, what men are looking for and what women are looking for are somewhat different for a very good reason. Women, at last I heard, you were the ones that got pregnant. So, and that does make a difference. The ramifications are so far that may not be true for long, but it is still true. Yeah. So that, intimacy is every bit as much of a need as stability is. And, it's interesting because among the people who come to me as an outpatient couples therapist, they're much more often, they're usually pretty good in stability, or they wouldn't be able to seek me out.
Right.
Or they wouldn't think to seek me out. Most of the folks I'm dealing with are pretty good in stability. They're good at running the business of the family, but they're having intimacy issues. And often, to the point of breaking up or wanting to break up or, that sort of thing.
So what do you think are some of the main causes of that issue of losing the intimacy or it declining? Again, I'm going back to the picture that you painted for us that, the marriage is a seed and it's planted. And, no pun on the No Fruit podcast because it all ties into what we're trying to do is help individuals grow. Because a lot of times we do feel that something has paved over our lives, over our marriage. And it could be so many things that you have described already. But we want to be fruitful, and we want to help those individuals who are listening to be fruitful in their marriage. So what is it, that you see are the main reasons that is an issue with the intimacy? Like, what's causing it? Because, again, we're doing so many things right, but we just can't move forward.
Yeah. Well, the way I probably oversimplified, I'm sure, but what the heck, the way I like to think about it, it's the chief skill of stability is all about behaving in ways that keep the anxiety level relatively low. You show up when you say you're going to show up. You're mostly sober because if there are people having substance issues, it's incredibly destabilizing often. All of that kind of stuff. The chief skill of intimacy, and this part often seems counterintuitive. People look at me funny when I say this sometimes. The chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety rather than avoid it. And that may sound odd because, wait a minute, isn't intimacy supposed to feel good? And of course it does when it does. But in those very circumstances we were just talking about, what if you want to talk about something that isn't so comfortable? It's like there's a disagreement happening, or there's a worry happening, or something like that. Well, people will tend to avoid that. And that is one way of saying that's when stable couples tend to lose intimacy. That was actually the subtitle of the first book I wrote, which is Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Couples Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. Yeah. It's tolerating anxiety is the key. And, a lot of couples therapy is about inviting people to be able to talk about these scary things, scary like about the future of the relationship. Sometimes they're deal breakers. To talk about them without freaking out. And of course, the therapist's job is to be the one in the room who's not freaking out, basically. That's the main job. So that they can tolerate the anxiety. And that's what lets them start to see, and I'm trying to keep my language clean here because I have a term I use for the moment when both couples, I'll call it the oh shoot moment. Shall I call it that? I think, I don't know what your language code is, but we'll keep it clean. The oh shoot moment is when it's not an aha moment, but aha means, we've solved it. Those are lovely. But the oh shoot moment is when a couple, you can see it happen. It's when a couple is saying, that's why you feel that way.
Right.
It's like, I wish you didn't, but I see why you do now. I feel this way. We still have the problem. That's why it's not an aha moment. But that's a moment of great intimacy. And that is the sort of thing that, if you can get there, if you can get people in that place of saying, that's why we're having this problem, they have a shot. And, sadly, sometimes the way they solve it is by realizing, wow, we're two good people, but not for each other, which is painful. But if they have kids, at least that's better than splitting up and being, thinking each other as enemies. But often they can find each other again. Often they can say, that's what's happening here. And it's amazing when you get two people into that place of intimacy. I don't want to get all mystical, but there is something sort of sacred about it. There's something that happens that is more than the sum of its parts. Intimate conversations, everybody involved in it are thinking thoughts they wouldn't have thought without everybody else there.
Yeah.
So that's when solutions will sometimes emerge. That's when people will find each other and realize, you were there all along. I knew there was a reason we got together. They can rediscover each other.
Well, you're being complete. I think that's the other part that sometimes we forget, that we complete each other. And we need to be reconnected at times to be complete and be a complete unit.
And I think in that as well, we have to understand that there is a level of fear that we all are dealing with, right?
Oh, yeah.
Fear of being judged, right? Not understanding that we might lack the real communication skills, right? Not fear of not being heard, whatever the situations are. So, because I'm listening to you talk about anxiety. Well, why would I have anxiety? Why have a fear of something, right?
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
And so how would someone get over that? Because again, as I said earlier, sometimes we don't see the examples of that.
Yeah. Oh, right.
So how do we get over that?
Yeah. It's funny. It's sort of ironic, I think. The way you get over it is by recognizing that it's not crazy to have it. And so often people will come in with that sense of, they'll worry that either the therapist or their spouse, if their spouse is already telling them, well, I think you're crazy. They may not be using those words, but they're feeling that. And what if the experience they have is, and I say this to almost every couple I meet in the first session, about 20 minutes in, usually it just turns out that way based on the stuff that we talk about first. About 20 minutes in, and I say, okay, well, now that we're old buddies because I've known you for 20 minutes, I can tell something about both of you. Neither one of you is like totally nuts. And they'll usually smile and say, well, you haven't seen, whatever. But and I say that, I said almost every couple, there have been a few over 30 years, have been a handful of exceptions where unfortunately, I don't mean to make fun of serious mental health issues. Somebody's having a psychotic break, somebody's having a manic episode. Right. Yeah, that's nuts, unfortunately. But most folks I'm working with aren't crazy. And those fears they're having are well-founded. They're having them for good reason. Coming into therapy, this is especially true for guys. Men come into therapy, mostly, I'm stereotyping somewhat, but it tends to be true. Most men coming into couples therapy are terrified. They won't. We were men. We won't
They're
admit
being
it.
dragged by their wives.
They're almost always being dragged by the wife. Yeah, no, that is the
That's
norm.
it. They're being dragged by those women.
Much more.
It's
Women
like,
want to talk about stuff,
it's like
and
either
men
we go
don't.
to therapy or we're out.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
no, that is typically the case. And the thing I actually did a video called "How to Get Your Reluctant Guy to Go to Therapy," and my point in that, speaking to women in that situation, like they're thinking we need to do something. This is not working. Why won't you do therapy? My point to the women in those situations is he won't listen to you unless you realize his fears are well-founded. He's not crazy to have them. He's right. Maybe you'll show up in couples therapy and the therapist will say, oh, what are you married to this jerk for? I don't say that, but I've heard stories. I mean, people kind of imply that sometimes. Or, they'll just flat out side with her and say, well, he's the problem, Or they'll think he's crazy for being afraid of it or judge him harshly or whatever. All of those are possible. So kind of an answer to your question, how do you help someone get over the anxiety? First of all, by recognizing that it's not crazy. Validating it. It's like, oh, yeah, well, of course, any person who's awake would probably be afraid in this situation. You're right. And then you can work with it. Because I think if people feel respected, fundamentally respected,
Yeah.
then they can deal with the hard stuff much more than if they're feeling like they have to defend their essential integrity.
Yeah. So we can go on for probably another 20,000 hours because this is because you're giving a lot of information and for those individuals that are looking to deal with their fear, their anxiety, lack of communication, and they want to hear your choice words.
Yes, indeed.
Where can they find you and all the information that both of you provide?
Well, so for my practice and my books and stuff like that, they can go to my website, which is brucechalmer.com. Just brucechalmer.com. If they spell my name right, they'll get it. And it'll be in your show notes, I hope.
It will.
So, yes, right. So brucechalmer.com. And then for our podcast, the title of our podcast I mentioned earlier, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. Our podcast website is ctin7.com.
So CT like couples therapy and then the number 7 in 7.com.
So that's they can have all of our episodes and find out more about us and more about our podcast.
All right,
Great.
cool.
Great. So this was, again, as Maurice has said, this has been a great episode. We could go on and on for hours, but, you'll probably start charging us for that.
Or maybe you should charge us for being on. So whatever. Break even
Well,
then.
I do have one last question for the both of you. I hope that, you'll receive this well and take it very well. It's a little intimate of a question, so hopefully you'll dig a little deep with it. If you could do a duet with anyone in the world, not each other, living or deceased, who would you sing that duet with?
Well, I happen to be a musician. We're both singers,
Wonderful.
and I'm a composer and singer, and so
And
I
we
do.
write songs
We write
together,
songs
too.
together too. So that's a great question. I'm going to toss that
Well,
one. to
you know who I'm duetting
Oh, I
with.
totally know who she's going to say.
You know
Okay,
who I'm
you
getting.
wanna
You
say
say,
who's each
You want me to
other's?
guess?
yeah, say.
Yeah, Leonard Cohen.
That's it.
Totally Leonard Cohen. I knew if I was competing with anybody, well, we've been married now for 21 years almost.
Wonderful.
And if I was competing with anybody, it was Leonard, but unfortunately he passed away, and
Well.
it wouldn't have been good relationship
No,
material,
not
frankly.
good
But
relationship.
yeah, she's always
That would
loved
be
his
my duet.
stuff. Yeah. Who would I do a duet with? Oh well, it's maybe ridiculous to say. Kind of coming out of left field. Either Glenn Gould, who's been gone for a long time, the pianist. I couldn't have kept up with him on the piano, but Glenn Gould or Johann Sebastian Bach himself. I'd love to have done a duet with. Hey, Johann, let's get it on. So I don't know if that quite is in the spirit you were asking.
That's
Okay, but
great. That's great.
There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, and we asked the question because we met. Basically, I was head of a local choir. I invited her to sing. And so that's where that question kind of derives from, because that is our past.
Well, see, music brought us together too.
yeah, I actually lead the choir at our synagogue. And so I've led choirs for decades, and I wrote a piece that Judy came to the concert of, and the rest was history.
Yeah, so we're all kindred spirits here.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, that's it, to make beautiful music together.
Most definitely.
Yes, exactly.
But we thank y'all very much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
Sure, no problem, man. We thank y'all very much for listening to the No Fruit Podcast, and we'll talk to you just a little bit later.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the No Fruit Podcast, where we bring you fruitful conversations, ripened wisdom, and love that's deeply rooted. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration in their day. Until next time, stay rooted in love, and remember, every seed you plant today shapes the fruit of tomorrow.